Season 4 is just around the corner, and it has never been more important to play a good build. There is so much new in-game challenging content coming out, and this build I'm presenting to you today is designed to crush, not just in the in-game, but also from level 1. This build will take you from level 1 all the way through clearing the hardest content in the game. And I know this because I did this already on the PTR. Minions are insane. You are going to obliterate the leveling process. You are going to be clearing the hardest content in the game so quickly, and you're going to be doing so much damage, and everything about this build is just great. Season 4 is by far the best patch we've ever received, in my opinion, and I am so pumped. Minions are massively buffed. Our AoE damage is insane. The minion survivability is crazy, and they now inherit 100% of our stats. Everything about this build is awesome. And you guys know I've always been a huge enjoyer of minions. I've always pushed for this build, and I really do think that at this point in time, no cope, I genuinely think that this might be the best Necro build in Season 4, and it might even be the best leveling build in the entire game. So, without further ado, let's get into this build, and let's start talking about how you can crush the content from day 1. I have divided this build into 3 main sections. The first is the leveling section from about levels 1 to 50. The second is a mid-game section from 50 to 100, and even a lot of your level 100, you're going to be playing the mid-game build. Then we have the ultimate in-game version that you're going to be swapping to once you start to get this gear, and you start to meet the stat requirements, and you start to push really high pits. Now, the emphasis of this guide is going to be on the leveling and then the mid-game version, but we will still briefly talk about the end-game. So, let's start with the leveling version of the build, and the full build is linked in the description down below, by the way. So if we look at the skill tree, we can go to the leveling path, and you can see here that we are going 5 points into Sever for the early game leveling version. This is because in the very early game, your minion's damage is not adequate. I'm talking about from like levels 1 to about 30 or so. When you get the Golem is really when you can start to think about swapping to pure minions. But until you get to that point, you're going to want to play this Sever version. And as part of that, you definitely want to grab Iron Maiden with Enhanced Iron Maiden. This is going to give you an insane amount of essence generation. You're going to be able to spam Severs. And what's so nice about the Sever is this rune right here, Supernatural Sever, where you get 2% increased damage per minion you have out. So we're going to be getting extra damage for every minion, and obviously want to get as many minions as possible, so it's kind of playing into our game plan. On top of that, because we're going to be playing the Shadow Mages, they're going to get buffed by the same things that buff the Sever. So these skill points here, with Gloom and Terror, both of these are going to buff the minions and the Sever, so we're getting a ton of extra damage. And you can go in here and you can see, you know, all the aspects and stuff, and you really want to prioritize getting on your offensive aspects, and you want to prioritize getting a two-handed scythe so that your minions can do the most amount of damage possible. So, and then once you start getting closer to the capstone, then you can start to think about maybe swapping out of Sever, and you can start to grab some of these defensive aspects. And that is when we'll start to transition to the mid-game. Now, in the mid-game, our full emphasis will be on our mages over the golem. This is because the mages have a very consistent damage pattern. It's very predictable, it's very reliable, and it's going to be cleaving through enemies, and they're just going to be hitting more targets per cast. In general, mages are going to be a lot better for farming and for doing speed content compared to the golem, which in the mid-game, you know, when we're doing Nightmare 100s, when we're doing early game pits, when we're doing our uber bosses, what we really want is consistency and reliability over, you know, what is less consistent and less quick, which would be the golem. As a result, the mid-game version is very focused on mages. Another important thing about the mid-game version is we're going to be swapping to Army of the Dead. Now, Army of the Dead itself isn't super powerful, but what makes it so good is the unyielding commander's aspect. This aspect makes it so that your minions do double damage during Army of the Dead, and when paired with the Fast Blood aspect, which reduces our ultimate cooldown every time we pick up a Blood Orb, well, we can get out a lot of Blood Orbs thanks to Blighted Corpse Tendrils, which means the cooldown on our ultimate will be very low. So basically what this is going to look like, right? We're going to walk up to a pack, we're going to pull the pack, we're going to pop Army of the Dead so our minions do crazy damage, and then we're going to use Corpse Tendrils to group the enemies together so that, you know, all the enemies are getting cleaved down by the AoE attacks of the Golem and the AoE attacks of the Mages, and even the Reapers do AoE damage. And all of that is going to be generating Blood Orbs, which we then pick up to reduce the cooldown on our ultimate, and then the ultimate gets popped again on the next pack. And the result is we end up getting tremendous uptime on our ultimate, and our minions are going to be obliterating everything. I'm telling you you guys, like the mid-game version is crazy. One of the things that makes this so good as well is we don't need any resource aspects, right? Because minions don't require any resources. This means this build just kind of works. A lot of other builds, like if you look at like Bone Spear and stuff, you need to start getting certain rolls on gear. You need to get a lot of essence generation, all that stuff for it to work properly. Minions just work out of the box, and everything that you do to them just makes them even better, and they're going to crush. And when you're looking at the fact that like from level 1 to like 75 or 80, you're mostly going to be doing Hell Tides if you're trying to be like efficient with leveling, and this build is going to annihilate them. So let's talk a little bit more about the mid-game version. We're going to be running the Aspect of Slaughter for the increased movement speed. Aspect of Hardened Bones is an amazing aspect. This aspect is going to be played in virtually every single build. It is a 100% uptime on, and this actually goes to 25% damage reduction, which is crazy. We're also going to be running the Aspect of the Protector. This is particularly good with capstone dungeons because the extra barrier makes it so easy to do capstone bosses. And it's also going to be a form of health regeneration effectively. It ends up being a pretty decent aspect. Of course, we're running a Cult Dominion, and this got buffed this season. So it's going to increase the number of Skeletal Warriors and Mages by 2. So instead of having to get 2 different aspects, both of which increase the number of Skeletal Mages or Warriors, we now get one aspect that does both, which is amazing. And then we're going to be running the Aspect of Reanimation on our 2-handed weapon for an 80% damage buff, the Aspect of Frenzied Dead on our necklace for this massive attack speed buff, which remember, attack speed is super important when paired with Cult Leader, which is the Paragon node here, where your minions do bonus damage for every point of attack speed they have, basically. And keep in mind, this is not a continuous. This is every 20% their damage shoots up again. And there is something about Cult Leader, okay? I have not been able to test this again, obviously, because PTR has been down. I believe that Cult Leader scales with both your attack speed and your minion's attack speed separately, and both cap at 100. That is my current theory of what's going on with Cult Leader. I need to do more testing, but keep that in mind that this build might even get more insane if that ends up being true. Now, we already discussed Fast Blood. Sacrilegious Soul is really good because it's going to be reanimating our minions. It's going to be casting Corpse Tendrils. Those Corpse Tendrils are going to be grouping mobs and spawning Blood Orbs, which is going to reduce our ultimate cooldowns. Overall, this is just really strong. And you can see that the mid-game version is very focused around our mages. It's very focused around getting out a lot of damage, a lot of mobility, and what you're going to see when we start to talk about the end-game version, there's a lot more emphasis on tankiness, and we're also going to be swapping a lot of our focus to the Golem. This is because a lot of the multipliers that affect the Golem are much stronger than the multipliers that affect the mages, and it's also going to save us skill points. And those skill points that we save, we can actually invest into survivability, which is going to be much more important in the later content. So basically, the Golem version won't be able to farm quite as quickly, but when you're talking about like pushing the hardest pits, which is what you're going to be doing in the end game, I believe the Golem version is the way to go. So in this setup, we are actually swapping our Shadow Mages to the damage multiplier. So we're going to be having out 5 Shadow Mages, so this damage multiplier is going to represent a 15% increase for the Golem. And as part of this, now, on gear, something we haven't talked about yet is the ranks to Golem and the ranks to Skeletal Mage Mastery. Now, on the PTR, you could roll this stat on every piece of gear, almost, but in the live version, you're only going to be rolling it on one piece of gear. They're changing this because it was too strong, and it's not entirely clear which piece of gear it's going to be on yet, so for now, I'm just leaving it as it is. But something to keep in mind, when you're playing the mid-game version, you need ranks of Skeletal Mage Mastery. When you're playing the final end-game version, you're going to be looking for ranks of Golem Mastery. And this change is going to be reflected in our skill tree as well, where we are no longer running Gloom or Terror, and we're instead opting for Necrotic Carapace and pairing that with Hewed Flesh. Something that's very important is that Hewed Flesh now procs Necrotic Carapace, which means we're going to be getting like infinite Fortify. So we're going to be permanently maximum fortified. Fortified now gives us 15% damage reduction instead of 10%, and you can see why this version of the build is much better for pushing. And on top of that, the Golem overall has more DPS than the mages. It just has a harder time getting it out, and it can take a little bit longer sometimes. But when mobs get tankier, it doesn't matter that the Golem takes an extra 1 or 2 seconds to start doing damage, right? It's not very important when mobs take 10 seconds to kill anyway. So that is why we're swapping to the Golem version. And something that's really important, by the way, I think more people need to be talking about this. Tyrael's Might, this unique, is crazy. So why is it crazy? 2 reasons. 1, it has damage reduction as a stat, which is very hard to find now, okay? And 2, it has maximum resistance to all elements. Why is maximum resistance to all elements so good? Well, currently you're capped at 70%. This Tyrael's Might, I believe, goes to 5%, but then we can greater affix it to 7.5%. Then we can masterwork it from 7.5 to like 15%. And when we're talking about 15%, we're going from 70% damage reduction from elements to 85%. That mathematically adds up to 50% damage reduction from elemental damage, okay? So if you get a greater affix, triple masterworked, maximum resistance, that is a 50% damage reduction against elements. That is insane, okay? That is absolutely insane. Now, the effect on it itself, where you permanently have the Divine Barrage with your minions shooting extra spears, this actually has a high form of utility in the form of it increases the effective range of your minions, meaning they're going to be pulling things that are like off the screen. So whenever you're attacking stuff, your minions are going to be tagging mobs that you can't even see, and then those mobs are going to get aggroed into the pile, and it's going to make clearing faster, particularly in harder content, right? When you're talking about doing really hard pit levels, you want to do gigantic pulls and burst them down. This is going to help with that, as well as giving us 50% damage reduction against elemental types, and also a decent amount of damage reduction, 10% on a max roll. Really strong. So overall, I don't want to spend too much time on the in-game version because I assume I'm going to iterate on this like crazy. You guys should check out my stream. I'm going to be playing this build from day one. I'm going to be taking it as deep as I can. I'm going to try to optimize every component of the build. You got any questions for me? You want to see the build update in real time? Check out my stream. And I will 100% update you guys after I hit level 100. I'm going to teach you guys everything I learned about the mid-game version. And then I'm going to start transitioning to the end-game where I will definitely be covering that. And yeah, guys, I'm so pumped for Season 4. Hope you guys are excited too. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Thank you all for watching. Peace.